think we're there, aren't we? Okay. Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for inviting me here this afternoon. Thank you, Adrian, for the introduction. If I could start with a small statistic, I am one of about 100,000 farmers currently working in the UK, and we are responsible for feeding a population of about 70 million people. So, when you think about that, I think it's fair to say that the primary role of a farmer is to produce food. But of equal importance is the preservation and conservation of the environment in which we work. So hopefully over the next 30-40 minutes through this presentation, I'll be able to sort of show to you how commercial agriculture in Britain can and does work hand in hand with environmental stewardship. So, okay, so if we start sort of telling you where we are. This is Perching Manor Farm. We are 1,800 acres. The top half of the farm is up on Truey Hill. You've got Shoreham and Portslade to the south of us, and you've got Devil's Dyke just to the east of us. So, the top of the farm here is predominantly chalk and flint soils. The fields are very, very large. In terms of habitat, it's mainly scrub. There's very few trees and hedges up there. However, the bottom of the farm here at Perching, that's very heavy clay soils with a lot of sand there too, and hedges, woodland. So there's a real difference there, and I think the term chalk and cheese is well applicable to our farm. So the present day farm, as I said, is 1,800 acres. We farm about 600 acres of combinable crops, which are wheat, barley, beans, and often oilseed rape. And we have a 100-strong herd of single suckler cows producing high-quality beef. So we'll calve 100, and we should get about 100 calves. Normally have about 20 or 30 followers. And in the mix there, we have about 300 or 400 sheep that we keep, but we have in on keep other farmer sheep. We haven't got enough labour to look after them. It's very important, as you'll find out, for conservation grazing on the farm. And as Adrian mentioned earlier, we do still have about 25 bag of goats, which have been performing an excellent job up on some of the really steep scarp slopes where the sort of traditional farm animals aren't so keen to go. So the reason I put that picture up there, let's go back. There we are. So that's present day full Perching Manor Farm, just above Fulking, with a modern tractor. Now, if we go back 75 years, that picture was taken in exactly the same place, on the chalk track going up between the bottom of Perching to the top of Truey. And as you'll probably know, post World War II, Britain was a hungry place. And there was a real drive for farmers to start producing more crops. And up until then, the top of the South Downs hadn't really been farmed. There were probably small farms up there, a lot of livestock, not really any arable crops growing. So the drive was to produce more food. And the farmers went up there, they cleared huge areas of scrub and actually damaged ground where the Canadian Army had been practicing all their shelling during the war. And they gave it a good clean up, and they started growing crops up there. I forgot to mention that Perching Manor Farm, which is still owned by the Brian Harris Trust, is now a third generation family farm. So this is actually Brian, I think back in the early 50s, was one of the most modern combine harvesters you could get, and that is yeah, up on top of Trudy Hill. So that's how farming started up there. Now, as farming progressed and agriculture progressed in the 60s right through to the 90s, the machinery got bigger, the fields got bigger, production got bigger. It involved a lot of chemicals, it involved a lot of fertilisers, and this is where the term barley barrels was coined, because it really was a productive landscape for agriculture. As the years went on, it was felt probably that the land was being exploited. It was at a time also when intervention stores had huge barley, heaps of barley, they had huge heaps of wheat. They had wine lakes, they had milk lakes. There was almost an overproduction. There was overproduction there. And as it turns out, farming started to get a bit of a bad name, and they realised that something had to be done. So the introduction of the ESA scheme in the 1990s, farmers were offered almost like a subsidy, like set-aside that you may have heard of, to stop growing commercial arable crops, try and reduce production. And to a lot of people, this seemed like a fantastic idea. To the farmer, it was a great idea because he was getting a fair payment for doing really rather absolutely nothing. And in return, the land was grassed back down, the arable crops disappeared, grassed back down into a low input grassland system where the idea was to graze animals, but unfortunately the grass was pretty poor quality. You could never really finish a commercial farm animal. So this is what it looked like up until 2010 when I took over running the farm. It was green, and you may think, oh, that's fantastic, but actually it was termed as green concrete. Now the reason being was that at the time the arable farming was going on up on top of Trudy Hill, there was a huge food source there, a food bank of seeds, of cover, all sorts of different things, especially for birds. And I remember Ron, who worked on the farm since he left school actually in the early 50s. He's in his late 80s now. But he said to me that the year that the arable crops went and the grass was put down, you could have heard a pin drop. So this went on until 2010. The payments helped the farm survive, but there was something really wrong with the wildlife. And the answer was a dramatic decline in down and bird numbers. Like I said before, you could hear a pin drop up there. The RSPB started to look at this decline and sort of almost declared a bit of an emergency up there. So they started to say, what can we do about this? And in conjunction with Natural England, they started to put together some sustainable stewardship initiatives for farmers to buy into. And that was the point at which we decided we would enter a new scheme. Now that scheme was called the HLS, which is the High Level Stewardship Scheme. And what it involved is selecting, not all, but some fairly large areas of the farm and planning up. We had all sorts of surveys done, environmental assessments to make sure that what we were touching wasn't species rich, for example. And they came up with a sort of an area of 300 or 400 acres up there that we could reinvent, we could put together a new arable regime. Not only arable, it would involve selective grazing of certain animals up there too, so we can enhance all the flora and fauna. So that year, 2010, there was a lot of ploughing, there was a lot of sowing of different plants. That also went for wild bird seed mixtures, it went for flower margins. It was a really big undertaking. And there you can see from that picture what we were trying to achieve, and what we were trying to achieve was a mosaic of features. So you can see this large field here is nearly 200 acres. We've got some cereals being grown on either side. We've got wild bird seed, and we've got a beetle bank in the middle. And that's sort of being replicated all over the farm. Margins, bird seed plots, but with the commercial farming running alongside it. Here we go again. So this is I like this picture. So once we can see that we've got our beetle bank here, which is harbouring all the invertebrates, small mammals. We've got our wild bird seed plots here, which we've planted. Plants like sorghum, millets, sunflowers, triticale, all sorts of things that the downland birds are going to thrive on. We've then, this side would have been a commercial spring barley crop, which is important to keep farm income. This side was actually a low input cereal crop, where we reduced all of our chemical and fertiliser inputs. And that, the idea of that was once it's harvested, it should leave a nice stubble there, which would encourage all sorts of new downland plants, or old downland plants, to come back. Now the sunflower plots are something that has sort of evolved from the wild bird seed plots. These are actually down at the bottom of the farm at Perching, and they're actually not part of our stewardship scheme as such. It's just something I really, really like to do, and the benefits are absolutely incredible. Although they look absolutely amazing, and if I had £1 for every photograph that was taken of this, we wouldn't need to farms anymore. But the introduction of those flowers brings in so many insects. It's absolutely incredible. It's absolutely alive with insects, these large plots. We put them sort of in intermittent, in arable fields. The benefit from the insects will move out into the crops and help us so that we can almost reduce our need for any artificial insecticide to zero. And then once the flowers die, the seed bank is absolutely huge, and the finches and those sorts of birds that come along in sort of October, November, December time is absolutely amazing. So we take a picture, I've got a picture here of doing some hedge planting on the farm. Unfortunately, back in the sort of 60s and 70s, modern agriculture didn't really like hedges. They had bigger tractors and bigger cultivators, and that was when a bit of a bad time and hedges were removed. But slowly but surely we're putting them back. And we are also sort of take quite a lot of pride in managing our hedgerows as well. So not only do we survey them, we also try and manage them, maintain them and cut them so that we can make sure that our nesting birds are properly protected. I know there's quite a drive to let a hedge go and don't cut it. I'm a firm believer that if you keep those nice thick hedges with nice thick bases, lots of food source within them, you're protecting the birds, you're protecting the nests, and it stops the corvids coming and taking the eggs and the small chicks. So we've had quite a lot of, and we have the Enfield Bird Society that come and do lots of surveying on the farm, usually once a month, and they've come back with some fantastic results when they're walking out. So that's just a slide to show you that commercial farming and nature recovery can work very well hand in hand. Beneficial. The HLS was very, very large on creating new stubbles for habitats. And it didn't take very long, really, once we'd set up our scheme, and after a couple of years, we had some really interesting, not only wildlife, but some really interesting florals coming back too. And here are some of the plants that have been photographed. The sort of ecologist Graham Lyons, I know he came and did some really good surveys on the farm, and these are some of the things that he picked up. So during the winter, as you can probably appreciate, the farm becomes quite sparse as a food source, certainly for birds. And one of the options that we've been using is a winter cover and fodder crop. So that involves planting a very quick crop after harvest time, which is either a stubble turnip or a forage rape or something like that. And this is what it looks like in about December. And we can put our cattle out there, and it's a really good food source for them. Far better than the grass or even the silage that we've grown for them. But it keeps them dropping their dung on the field, which in turn brings the insects, which in turn brings the birds. But it also provides a really good cover up until about January, February, training ground in birds. So, like I said before, we've got 100 strong head of breeding cattle, and they're up on top of the hill there. There's probably still about 600 acres of fairly sensitive grassland that we have to look after. So, with a fairly low stocking density of cattle and with sheep, it's important to make that point that we need to mix the cattle with the sheep in order to effectively graze this at certain times of the year to look after certain plants and look after certain food sources. Now, the Hungry Gap, probably about 3 years after the introduction of the high-level stewardship scheme, with all the wonderful bird seed plots that we were planting in the margins and the stubbles and what have you, what they were noticing was that you got to about January, February time, and all that food source had been depleted. We encouraged all of these birds to come back to the farm, and they were here, but there was nothing left for them to eat. So they introduced another option, which was to supplementary feed the birds. So what we do now, this time of year, a couple of times a week, we go out with the little spinner that's on the back of the truck there, and we feed a couple of tubfuls of grains that we've grown on the farm. So normally barley, wheat, bollseed rape, a bit of linseed. I buy in some sunflower hearts, niger seed, mix it all up. In fact, we mix quite a lot up. It's about 5 or 6 tons we normally do. And we go and spread them about in the stubbles. And when the truck is driving along like that, it's quite often like the Pied Piper. We've never seen anything like it. The only issue we're starting to see now is we're getting a huge amount of sort of crows and rooks coming along, which is something that we need to try and evolve and work out how we can discourage. So I put this one up. Might think that that's probably not the best thing to show farming conservation with nature, a crop sprayer and a fertiliser spreader. But they are very important for our farming business, and technology now has enabled us to make this particularly effective and safe in everything that we do. Both of these machines are running on satellite guidance, and not only are they being told where to steer, but they're only applying chemicals at the exact places required, chemicals and fertilisers. So we're investing heavily in this. We're not blanket spraying, we're not blanket fertiliser spraying. We have to produce food to a certain standard and at a certain quantity, and the economics of our business. But with the use of this sort of equipment, we can put those chemicals and fertilisers in exactly the right place. One of the big things that's coming along in agriculture now is measuring our carbon footprint. So we're sort of fairly well ahead of the game with that. And we have, at every step, we're trying to look at how we can reduce the release of carbon. The biggest release of carbon is, one of the biggest releases is ploughing the soil, as we used to do in the old days. Now we're trying to drill our crops directly into the top of the stubbles, so we're not disturbing the soil, which is alive underneath it. And in that vein, we're also reducing our use of artificial fertiliser by using more compost, 'cause this is pretty much compost going on, biosolids, and since we've been using this, we have almost reduced our need for artificial compound fertilisers to zero. And other benefits of this are that it really encourages things like worm activity in the soils. Once again, really helping the birds. So farming is a fairly insular profession. We're on our own most of the time. Sometimes you can go for a whole week without seeing anybody else. But it's really important that we try and work with our neighbours and share all our experiences with our neighbours to enhance the environmental work that we're doing. So we're a member of a local farm cluster group. We all sort of get together and sit around a table, map the areas that we're on, talk about the good environmental things that we're doing, share ideas. One farm might say, well, how did you attract such a bird? We want to attract that. It's all good sharing. And one of the big things that's come out of this is wildlife corridors, where we're trying to position our wildlife features in conjunction with our neighbours, so that not only do we have a good wildlife capture on our farm, we can also transfer it onto our neighbours. There we go there. So having a farm, that was a farm walk. The local farmers seeing what we were doing, talking about how we can improve and add other ideas. So 2024 is going to be a really big year for us, because the high-level stewardship agreement that we entered 14 years ago is now coming to an end. And we've now decided to join a new countryside stewardship agreement, which I'm really quite excited about, because we have learned over the last 14 years what works and what doesn't work, what we can attract and what we can't attract, what we can improve on, and we can add that all into our new scheme. I put a picture of the lapwing up there because I think that's probably one of our greatest wins down at Perching over the last probably 5-10 years. It came by chance, to be honest with you. One of our options was a fallow, a 1 hectare fallow plot. And one spring we noticed a pair of lapwings had arrived. And everyone thought this was rather exciting, and RSPB came out and lots of surveys and lots of watching. And I don't think too much happened that first year. Then the second year, 3 or 4 pairs arrived in exactly the same spot at exactly the same time. And they put some nests down, laid some eggs, and they actually hatched them and they fledged. And it created a lot of interest. And it really was a sort of a sign that we've done something really well. And for the last probably 5 or 6 years, more and more have been returning, and more and more chicks have been fledged. So, yeah, that's a real success story for us, and it's something that I want to keep improving on, and the new scheme will allow us to do that by perhaps positioning our plots in slightly different places, more awareness of the nests, lots more marking. Really, really, really interesting. Species. Now, for the last, as long as I can remember, really, the drive to attract turtle doves down at the farm has been huge. We've had lots of interested parties, the RSPB, the Henfield Bird Watch. We've tried scattering seed at certain times of year on the tracks. We've tried all sorts of things. We've put up motion track cameras. A lot of time has been spent on this. And unfortunately, we haven't been very successful. However, part of our new countryside stewardship is going to allow us to create a special project which is going to be funded through our stewardship scheme. Now, this area of the farm here is probably about 5 hectares, I would have thought, probably nearly 10 acres, over 10 acres. Now, in there, it's all scrub, there's a lot of willow, it's very wet, but it's an absolute ideal haven for wildlife. It's been untouched probably for about 50 years now. It's really not utilised on the farm. So we've come up with a plan that we're going to ring fence that area. We're going to selectively remove any plant species that we don't want in there. We're going to thin out some of the wood. We're going to create a wetland in there. And also certain areas that hopefully this turkey dove will like to come and visit. It's a really big project. It's going to cost quite a lot, involve quite a lot. But I think that there is going to be an absolute wildlife addition to our farming project. So, to conclude, I am a farmer, I am a food producer, and probably just as importantly, I'm a custodian of our landscape. So, that's about it really. Any questions?
Okay, I don't know about you, but I found that incredibly inspiring. Any questions for David? I'll start at the front with Ellin.
David, the Latins, where were they, what was it
Can I just, I'll repeat the question back for the room. What was it about the lapwing plot that you think brought the lapwings in?
I think the positioning of it was unwittingly crucial. It was set in the middle of a fairly large arable field. We made sure we kept the soil bare, so we actually cultivated it. And yeah, they're quite new to me, so it was quite bizarre that a bird would come and create a nest right out in the middle of the open, with all the predators running around it. How they survived was quite incredible. Also, we had a fairly close water source, which I think was also really important.
You know, on that area,
No, absolutely, just an arable situation. Yeah.
Okay, next question. Gentleman in the middle.
Does the proposed net welding corridor go anywhere near or through your farm?
Does the net welding corridor go near or through your farm?
It's not something that I am aware of, no.
I'm getting a shake of the head from Chris at the front as well. And Mark.
What are the requirements for planting crops for wild birds from the government in terms of how long you have to leave the crop on the ground?
Okay, what are the government requirements for putting a bird for the crop in?
Okay, so to plant the wild bird seed crop, we'll be required to prepare the ground and plant it in about May. So when the weather's warmed up, because we're using a lot of sort of less common seeds, so we're using sorghum, sunflowers, and millet, which are crops that wouldn't normally grow in the colder climates. So we want to get them planted by about May. And then we will leave that right through to about the following March. So although hopefully the crop will flower in August, September, and then the seed will set, hopefully you've got some good seed source by November, December, January, February, the seed's normally gone, but the cover is still there. And then by about March, April, it's all depleted, so it's time to start thinking again and redoing it.
Okay.
Do you do any predator control on the farm?
Is there any predator control on the farm?
So yes, there is some, not that I do it myself, but there are people who come. The one thing that I do try to control are the corvids, the rooks and the crows. Not only do they do a huge amount of damage to our arable crops, they also, you can see them going into the hedges and what have you. Magpies is another big one. did have someone who sort of tends to be controlling them. And foxes. So the guys would go out and we don't have a bird shoot or anything like that on our farm, so we're not, and we don't actually lamb sheep. So we're probably a little bit quieter when it comes to sort of fox predators. But it has opened our eyes, certainly with the lapwings coming, that we do need to be aware of it to try and keep them under control.
Yes, I think the lapwings raising chicks suggests not only good habitat, but fairly predator-free.
Yeah. Yeah.
Barry, do you have grey partridges?
No, we don't. There is a huge amount of interest in grey partridges, certainly up on the downs. But it's probably an element that we haven't really properly bought into. I think it's almost like a stewardship project on its own, the grey partridge. But I'd like to think that the species we have attracted up there since the introduction of all of these schemes has proven that we are doing the right thing.
At the back.
How easy is it for you to persuade other farmers to carry on practice or start practicing like you do?
How easy is it for you to persuade other farmers to follow suit?
I think it's becoming increasingly important for farmers to find this now, because any up-and-coming government subsidy scheme involves environmentally friendly farming. So, whereas before it was something that you could choose to do, now it's going to be something for the survival of your business you are going to have to buy into. Quite what level that is, I must say that certainly the older generation, maybe like my father would have been, he's a farmer and he stands by, he produces food and he produces wheat and he produces beef and he produces lamb. It's been quite hard for him to realise how important move away from not only thinking about that but also the sort of things we're doing. So,
yes.
You mentioned that you thought that water source might help the land population. Do you have any dew ponds
on the upper part, sorry.
Yes, okay. So questions about lapwings, water sources, and whether you have dew ponds up on the top.
Up on the top of the hill, no, we don't. Water is quite a scarce source on top of the downs. There are some, certainly not very far from us, the National Trust has opened up some dew ponds. But what we're seeing is that lapwing are most concentrated at the bottom of the farm. They're not, we haven't really seen them right on top of the downs there. We are seeing the larger numbers, certainly the bigger visiting flocks are always coming down to the bottom, so, which is actually where we've got plenty of water.
Yes.
I'd just like to help David answer the previous question about how you...
So this is Martin, who many of you will know from Pevensey.
I'd just like to help David with that previous question, because he's being unduly modest. At the centre of a cluster is usually a farmer who does things right, and David is definitely one of those. And farmers are hugely convinced by looking over the fence at a business that A, works in practical terms, which is the health of your crops and the health of your animals, B, works in financial terms, which is how much money do you make. I'm not asking you that question. I'm going to ask Annie that question tomorrow. But also, you've been doing it a while now, and it's so important to that cluster that the journey you're on is something that they get a bit jealous about and competitive over. So I just want to say well done, David. I've loved your talk. Keep up the good work.
For those who don't know, Martin has an amazing fan out on the levels as well, doing amazing stuff. Yes?
You've spoken quite a lot about
the sort of ways you're bringing seeds into the environment. You mentioned the cattle, the manure, beetle bags, but I'm sort of curious about what other things you might be doing with regard to the insects.
Okay, so as well as beetle banks and all those, are there some things that you haven't mentioned that you're doing for insects?
Insects, well, one of the big ones was the sunflower plots. So that's bringing in, and also the wildflower margins. We've got 6 metre margins, grass margins, whether they're flowers or whether they're just naturally regenerated margins. And that's where we hope to try and build up colonies of predatory insects. And a very good example of that was last year. We had a fairly large field of spring beans. And spring beans can succumb to black bean aphid at a certain time of year, and they can decimate a crop of beans really quite quickly. And I remember walking out into the field, and every other plant was encased in thick black aphids all over it. I thought, frankly, the last thing I want to do is use an insecticide at this time of year. It's the absolute last thing. But we could lose our crop. But we held our nerve, and within the next couple of days we walked out, and every plant had a couple of ladybirds walking out. And we left it, and they saved the crop. And honestly, it was a real feel-good time because we made the right decision to leave. And I think if it weren't for the areas that we're leaving at the sides of the fields, the 6 metre flower margins, the 6 metre conservation margins, we wouldn't have built up that armoury of predatory insects. So yeah, we've got the beetle bank, we've got the margins. I think actually just looking after the bird seed plots, and also, like I explained, the way in which we cultivate the ground. We're not turning it over all the time. We're drilling into the top. We're leaving what's there to do its business. And so I'd like to think that's how we're progressing here.
We've still got more questions. Yes, please.
Could you comment on the size of the farm you think is necessary in order to have this diversity? I mean, you're farming a lot of hectares at the moment, but if you were a smaller unit, could you adapt your methods to cope with that?
If you're a smaller farm, could you still achieve?
Absolutely, you can. There is. I really don't think there's a limit to where you can go with it. We've just recently taken on a small addition to the farm. We're renting a small grassland farm. Initially, that was really just to help us with grazing and forage growing. But on that too, we've got a stewardship agreement where we've planted a few new hedges. We've put in some herbal lay grass mixes to try and encourage different species of grass. It doesn't have to just be for a large arable farm. There are lots of things there's lots of little options you can do. There's a great big booklet that you can follow and choose your options, and choose your options that will suit your particular business. You need to have a look and see what are you trying to achieve in terms of a commercial business, because that's what's earning the money. And then you look at how can nature work hand in hand with our farm business. And I really don't think there is a cut-off as to what's viable and what's not.
Lady in the back there.
I wonder if you've reduced the spraying of chemicals as you've seen the impact and importance of the insect life on your farm.
Okay, so that's in reducing chemicals. Have you seen an impact on the insect populations?
Yes, I think we have. It's not something that you will see in 1 or 2 years. It's something that you'll probably see, will be a legacy. It'll be something that you'll see over a longer period of time. I think all farmers will agree that in terms of insecticides, they really are the last tool in the box that we get out. They really are the last option. And in the vast majority of cases on our farm, we do not use them. There are certain things that we might, but then we try and use a very specific, we'll spend more money and we'll use a very specific chemical that only targets a particular pest, as it were. In terms of pesticide use in general, which of course does affect the environment, we're constantly looking at ways of reducing that. And I can say that with the use of cultivation, different types of cultivation, the use of composts and manures, we can sort of change the ecology of the soil and how weed seeds react. And over the past few years, we have certainly reduced the amount of chemical that we are using. Because as I've said before, we are a commercial farm, and we do need to produce food. So it's quite a fine balance that we're trying to manage.
One final question, Fals, your hand up first, thanks.
Just a comment really, that the area that you're going to improve, that was the area where there used to be turtle doves, so hopefully they'll recognise that and they'll come back. I think they've disappeared over the last 10 years as the turtle dove population has declined everywhere else, apart from there, of course. But also, you know, it's just amazing down there because you've got nightingales, you've got yellowhammers, linnets. It's just a lovely area.
There we go, thumbs up from Val and from Henfield Birdwatch that possibly there is a great chance of turtle doves coming back. I'm going to have to break us now for the break. Dave, I'm glad you finished your talk 5 minutes early because you see the amount of questions that the floor has got. So much of our bird watching time is spent out in your kind of workplace and understanding more about how the farmers go about their business, how they're trying to fulfil their multiple options. One thing I noticed you didn't mention, probably out of modesty, was that the farm won the Silver Lapwing Award.
That was a fair few years ago. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, that was really nice to be awarded that. And that was part of us with the HLS conservation drive that we did. And hopefully that pushed us on to strive to keep maintaining the standards.
Yeah, even though it was a few years ago, it kind of shows that you were in there early, doing the right stuff to ensure that nature works. And I don't know about all of you, but it gives me great heart and hope to have somebody be willing to come and talk to us about what they're doing to try and nurture wildlife in the way. So, David, Ellin, thank you very much. Okay, this is your afternoon break. We come back at 3:10, ready for the final